how are you like, taking care of yourself during quarantine?
During quarantine, I actually just posted about this. I was pretty overwhelmed recently just because my dad was actually tested and he tested positive. So it's been a scary time recently, but the ways that I checked in with myself were trying to keep my body moving. I struggle with seasonal depression, so making sure I got enough vitamin D, whether that was like walking outside or, taking like little supplements, that was something as well. I think centering myself has become very important in my life, whether that's through writing. I'm also trying to practice mindfulness, which is very hard for someone like me because I'm constantly moving a lot. And my mind, not only my body, but my mind is moving a lot. So there's a bunch of different ways, but one thing that's stayed constant since I was born basically is like I've just always been doing art and always painting. And that's just a way that I can do something while not really do anything mentally at the same time.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And also like definitely like best wishes to your family and your dad. But I think that I feel like this is such an unprecedented time. And I think that it's definitely like forcing people to tap into things like mindfulness or maybe just like little ways to take care of yourself. I think the beauty of so much of your success is that you're not only talented, but you're also just like so open and genuine with everything you're going to. You're also representing so many marginalized communities at once, though. Can you talk a little bit more about the different identities you hold and how they've intersected throughout your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I identify as deaf, trans, genderqueer, trans masculine. The way I present is very stereotypically masculine, Jewish and Chinese, and of course just queer, like pansexual if you want to be very specific about it. But I think overall, one of the biggest revelations I've had throughout my life is that all my identities are on a continuum. And this is a realization that would have helped me if someone had explained this to me or had the terminology to explain it to me at such a young age, because I was constantly feeling othered. There was just, there were so many categories and labels in the world, and I always felt one step behind them. Like with my disability, being deaf, I was never stereotypically deaf, where I grew up and I went to a deaf school and I used sign language as my primary language. And um, I was verbal and I don't have a deaf accent. And because of that, I felt like I couldn't be completely accepted in the deaf community. But then also I felt outside of the hearing community because I just was always exhausted. Like having simple conversations would take everything from me, all of the energy, because it'd be so much lip reading. So that's an example of realizing that deafness is a spectrum and that's valid. And if I had grown up with that, I would have I would have stopped comparing myself and I would have been able to empower myself and be my own representation, which luckily I can do today, thanks to like the language and the communities of people that I found. So overall, that's, I think, is how that they all tie in with my race. I'm biracial, I'm Jewish and Chinese, and because of that, I always felt outside that way. With my sexuality, I'm not 100% gay or 100% straight. It's very, rare, if not impossible, to be 100% gay or 100% straight. But
Yeah.
yeah. And with gender, I just identify non-binary. I don't feel like a boy or a girl, and that's completely valid.
Yeah. And I think that's beautiful that like that you said that perfectly. Like everything is kind of like exists on this spectrum, like gender exists on that spectrum, sexuality, and even people can identify one way like today and then a new way tomorrow, and that's all like super valid. And just like again, thank you for like sharing all of that with us because I think that's why so many people can find you relatable and there is so much pressure to just like be um like binary, not only in gender, but just like in everything, like, oh, am I gay? Am I straight? And like just putting a label to everything. Like labels do help us find community, but they can also feel like so restricting sometimes. And I
Yeah.
think people sometimes can be like scared to like explore around and like see what fits them best. Do you think though that any parts of your identity were more salient when you were younger as compared to now?
Um,
Yeah.
Growing up, I realized that I was given the language to speak about my disability, whereas with gender and sexuality, I wasn't given any language. And the reason is because my disability was seen as a medical issue. And I think in my case, both of my parents are doctors. They knew how to speak about things like that. I was given spaces where I could speak about being deaf and know the correct terminology to connect my thoughts. With gender and sexuality, there was nothing. There was just boy, there was girl. I just lived within the binary construct, and because of that, I think my deafness was definitely a bigger factor in my life at that point, just because I was given the terminology to talk, sorry, to talk about it.
Yeah. You've talked about this a little bit, but do you consider yourself, I'm not sure if you've like put this out there before, but do you consider yourself like deaf, like with the capital D or with the like lowercase d? Because I know there is a distinction.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I think I'm actually continuously navigating because I'm continuously navigating my own deaf identity. Um,
Hmm.
I have to understand more of, I, I just worry, I always worry about taking up space,
Yeah.
and I have to figure out the exact details for claiming that title. But I feel like being deaf impacts every facet of my life, every moment of my life. It's never something that really I get a break from or that is outside of me. I feel so inherently deaf. And for that reason, maybe I would claim capital D deaf, but I think it's a work in progress. I'm still figuring it out.
Okay, yeah, that's super valid. We've been talking a lot about identity, and I think that geography is an aspect of that that's often understated, or even like with some people, especially like people, I don't know, it can be understated or overstated, right? Like I grew up in Northeast slash Southeast DC. Our culture there is very Black, very queer, very progressive, and there's also so much religious diversity there, which has definitely shaped my journey and my beliefs. Did growing up in Central Pennsylvania have any influence on when or how you came out?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
just a little bit. No,
Thanks,
I felt very isolated in Central Pennsylvania. I felt very alone growing up for 17 years of my life. Um, there were no deaf people around me. I was the only one, and there were. It's a predominantly white area, known to be pretty conservative. I always sum it up actually by saying Trump came to speak at my high school, and that was a very hard moment in time for me. But that kind of depicts the culture for you of this area. Um, I was lucky enough to have the family that I do. I always say that I won the family lottery, and it wasn't my family that wasn't very accepting. It was more so the culture I grew up in, and my family just had no idea how to talk about the things I was going through. And because they didn't have the terminology to talk about it, they didn't even know that these things were happening. So it was just a lot of oblivion growing up here and a lot of ignorance.
Yeah,
So I think for that reason, it took me a lot longer. Also, as a deaf individual, I I think it took me a bit longer to have access to certain things that hearing people do. A lot of people will go on social media or YouTube to find, videos of individuals talking about their queer experience, their disabled experience, etc. But not all those videos were captioned. And I think for that reason, it potentially could have slowed down my connection to those communities and those identities. But I also have no idea for that specific thing. I'm not sure.
okay, yeah, definitely. And I'm sure there's like been a stark difference now that you're in New York, right?
Yeah, New York is like heaven on it for me.
Yeah, I bet. And do we have a question from the audience, Marco?
Yeah, we do. There's a few people that have been asking about, as a college student and a student leader, how can they bring more inclusivity to a place like Penn State, where it is primarily white, and to like other communities that are like it?
I think that being there and being able to present things to your community leaders are the first step. Like whether that is asking for more gender neutral bathrooms, whether that is asking for your classes to be transcribed live, or asking for, an interpreter in class, depending on what you need for that space to be inclusive. I think presenting it to them and like gathering a group of people behind you who also support that as well, whether that is people who need it themselves or allies, can be very powerful. And petitions as well. I did a bunch of those myself in high school when I identified as a cisgender girl. And I remember they used to sexualize our shoulders and we weren't allowed to show our shoulders. So I got so enraged at one point. I just made this huge petition, and my school is like really a pretty big school, but I got like a lot of people, not just femme people, to sign it. So I think petitions, even if the petition doesn't work, at least you got more attention towards that subject. Protests, holding online protests has been incredible, especially during this time. That could be something that's super useful. Make an Instagram account, repost things, make videos, potentially make something more fun, make an art project around the theme. There's so many different ways to get word out about what you're passionate about and what you need support in.
Thank you. And I think another part of your identity that we haven't been able to talk about quite yet is your Jewish heritage. How has that influenced your journey?
I've done a lot of thinking about this recently, and one of the first lessons that they teach us in Sunday school, at least my Sunday school, was about the Holocaust. And I think that's such a heavy topic for such young kids, and being introduced to something as haunting as the Holocaust really made me realize how drastic humans can go to when they believe this is the right thing, and how intense discrimination can become. And I remember reading like Anne Frank, and that last line, like, this is so, people say it all the time, but she says, in spite of everything, I still believe people are really good at heart. And I think that learning that in Sunday school always stuck with me, and learning and hearing from Jewish people when they have been in the face of discrimination has really empowered me to persevere when facing my own discrimination, whether that is from being Jewish or just in any other facet of my identity, because all my identities tend to be, many of my identities tend to be minorities. And because of that, there's certain discrimination that I face. So I think being Jewish right off the bat has taught me about persevering in the face of discrimination, and also just like how there can be an instant community to fall back on. That's something that was just there because it's part of my ethnicity. I just always have been Jewish since day one. And because of that, I've always had a community behind me.
Yeah, I think the community definitely can get you like through anything, and I think that's why like coalition building and even back to like the audience question, like just having people who understand what you're going through, who can like support you to that even if they don't understand, just being like having that willingness to learn about others, and like having been given like just like the empathy of people around you is so important in getting you through all these things. What sort of response did you receive like during and like after your transition? Yeah.
Man, like everything, it was a continuum of responses.
Yeah.
Where there was everything, but overwhelmingly positive, at least from what I saw, which was striking to me because I didn't anticipate any specific response, but the amount of support that I got was something that I wish I could have showed my younger self.
Yeah.
after like years and years of repression and inner struggle and inner dialogue with myself, I never expected it to be that way. And I think it's not always that way for people still. So
Yeah.
I was extremely thankful and privileged to be able to have that type of reaction.
Yeah. And where do you see justice movements coming together to meet the needs of those who are marginalized in multiple ways and like have these multiple identities? Or like, where do you think are some areas where like community needs to kind of come together and supporting people with those like more complex identities?
Where do you? Sorry, give me a second to read the caption.
Yeah.
I think open conversations, honestly, that has been the absolute key. Like being able to hold conversations without aggression and just really truly listen to someone who has more, as you said, complex identities. It changes everything. It expands our communities and expands our minds. And I think also understanding, you brought this up before, understanding the difference between when labels and definitions are good versus when they're bad. I think labels and definitions can be great when they are connecting us and connecting our complex identities and our communities. But as soon as people from our own communities begin to gatekeep those identities and project what they believe should be allowed in their own community, that's when it becomes hurtful. So I think understanding understanding that you need to have open conversations, and then understanding when to take up space and when to not take up space, and realize that you yourself should not gatekeep who is allowed in the community.
Yeah, I definitely think that's like a very like hard line to balance, because you don't want to like infiltrate spaces or like labels that you may not fully understand, but it's also like you want to have that like ability to explore yourself. And it's a hard line, but I mean, I do think that our generation is like doing the necessary work of like trying to educate ourselves on everything and just be very understanding and not like overly police people's identities, but also like protect what is sacred to like maybe like minority cultures. I was actually reading one of your interviews though, and you said something that really struck me because I relate to it so much. You had basically mentioned that at this point you feel solidified and at home in your queerness, but you're still kind of looking for that deaf community. So like, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that right now I have reached a point where I fully understand, as I said in that quote, my queer identity, and I feel at home in my body, which is something I never thought I'd be able to say authentically. But with my deafness, I'm not sure if it's because there's not as much. I'm not sure that the continuum is shown as clearly within disability. And perhaps that is just my own ignorance and that I just have not looked in the right places or found the right people. But I think I'm continuously looking for a place that I truly belong in the deaf community. And I've definitely found, sorry, that was like low hanging fruit. I've definitely found certain people within the deaf community that have like welcomed me with open arms, and I'm like forever grateful for that. And just what I said, but man, I wish there were better words to say it. But yeah. I mean, like I said, I still don't even know if I identify lowercase deaf or big D deaf. And yes, there's just so much that I wasn't taught about my own culture because I was mainstreamed and I was in hearing culture around hearing people all the time. So I just have a lot of research to do and understanding before I fully understand it myself.
And I just want to take a second to bring in some more questions from the audience.
Okay.
All right, so we have a few questions from several different people, primarily Bree and Laylee, asking about specifically like the challenges in this this moment of time when it comes to LGBT people, and how do you think people should really go about both like money as well as like how just go through this negative time and like your experiences with it. I know you mentioned your father as well as like just kind of the struggles you've been seeing. How would you recommend people going about going through all this negativity?
I think that this has been something I've been focusing on personally since I was diagnosed with depression in 8th grade. It's really different for every single person. You just have to find what's best for you. But a mechanism that I devised, because I can be very nerdy, is I made like this Excel chart, and for a week, I documented when and where I got my happiness and or fulfillment from. And it can be super simple, as you take a piece of paper, you make a row of 7, and then each day you monitor like, what was the weather like? How many steps did you take? Your screen time, because we can monitor that now. And like, just like what you did today, and then miscellaneous. And then at the end of the day, I just wrote like 1 to 10, how happy or satisfied I feel. You can use whatever adjective you want there. But after that week, I realized some obvious things, like, the more I moved my body physically, the more sunlight I got, the less I spent on my phone, etc. I was overall more happy. And I think that it could just be a small exercise you could do during this time in isolation. And I think you could get really great results, considering we're literally quarantined. You can have very specific results with this experiment. But, really analyzing how you feel happiness and fulfillment in your own way. I think once this all blows over, hopefully soon, we'll be able to shift and make little alterations within our own busy life when it's back to normal, and feel more happiness and fulfillment overall. I think that looking forward to it with an optimistic way, like light, can definitely be the best thing you can do during this time.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions about specifically your art, and how your queer identity affects your art, as well as the meaning behind your tattoos.
Oh man, okay. My queer identity affects my art. Okay, well, my queer identity is just my identity. So I think that it's just translated through my art within everything that I do, simply because it influences me consciously and unconsciously in many different ways. As a kid, when I was drawing a lot, I didn't have the terminology to explain myself authentically, but I did have a pen and a paper, and those were ways that I could depict my feelings inside when I didn't have the words to. And through that, I drew a lot of androgynous or agender looking people, and I think that in a lot of them, they were crying at the time, and there was a lot of sadness in the photos. And looking back, I see that so clearly, but now it's just strange for me to think about. Now I don't really draw people crying anymore. I don't depict many sad things, but that's one way, I think, not necessarily struggling with my queerness, but struggling with discrimination translated into my art. I think it also enabled me to draw individuals having romantic or sexual interactions with each other, and not have to explain it to anyone who was looking at my drawings, and or just be able to have them to myself. I think it was a catharsis, not only was I not able to talk about it, but sometimes I didn't want to talk about it. And drawing just gave me an outlet, I forgot the second question. Sorry.
No, you're fine. The meaning behind your tattoos.
Oh, okay. So the first tattoo I got is on my thigh. It's a terrible stick and poke. I got it I did it myself when I was 15. Don't do that. I'm not endorsing that at all. But it was just 3 dots. And at the time I was signing all my artwork like that. Looking back, I think it's probably because I didn't connect with the name I had at the time, my birth name. So rather than sign any name at all, I just kind of drew 3 dots, and that was my way of leaving an imprint in this world. So I thought, if I saw my artwork like that, why not sign my own body like that. So that was my 15-year-old logic. So that is on my my right hip. And then when I got out of central Pennsylvania, it was huge for me simply because I was able to connect with people and cultures that I felt deprived from my entire life. So I wanted to have some type of artwork on my body to cement that accomplishment. So that is this face right here. And it's just kind of like the picture that epitomizes my art at that moment in time. It's changed and shifted as I continue to grow, as anything does. But I wanted a face that kind of signified how my art looked overall at that time, and that's that face. And then then I got this tattoo. I'm not going to take off my shirt, but it says Def AF on the side of my ribs here. And that's one that Mary V actually gave to me about 2 weeks after we met. Mary V is my partner and like amazing human. But she gave that to me as a stick and poke right after starting college. And that was just kind of reclaiming my deaf identity. I've had a lot of bumps and struggles with it growing up. There were times where I didn't want to be deaf. There were times when I felt othered from, as I talked with Maya about the deaf and the hearing community. So this was kind of not only the start of my new life in New York, but the start of reclaiming my deaf identity. And of course, I would soon know many other parts of myself that I also shunned at the time growing up. And then this line tattoo kind of translates into that. Sorry, I have so many tattoos. I'm probably talking so much, but I'll make this short. So this is a line tattoo that kind of symbolizes like the fluctuation of my gender identity. And a lot of people don't know this, but if you look really closely, it actually stems out of this mole that I have right here. And it looks like a dot, but it's all coming out of this dot that's actually on my body. So, you know, it kind of signifies that it was all inherent and finally showing itself to the world. And it comes up to this, these 3 words, I love you, but they're flipped. So this is actually a letter that I wrote myself when I was in 8th grade. And it's when I first got diagnosed with depression. And I want to remind myself that in the face of any adversity or discrimination, whenever I was feeling low, that to persevere, essentially. And I signed it, I love you, and signed my birth name at the time. And I wanted this tattoo. I didn't want to have to turn to a physical letter to be able to remember these things. I wanted it imprinted on my body. And because of that, I took that I love you in its exact handwriting, and I have it on my arm here, but it's flipped. So when other people look at it, they won't really understand it right away. But when I look in the mirror, I'll instantly be able to see it clearly and remember it, because that I love you is for me. It's not for anyone else. And then, you know, actually the last tattoo I consider myself having are my top surgery scars, just because it was a choice for me to get them, and they leave a mark. And I think that that's what tattoos essentially are. And to me, I'm so proud of them, and I feel so incredibly lucky to be able to have gotten top surgery, which is a huge privilege so many people don't have. And I wanted to be able to feel empowered by them and have them be an indicator of who I am with my queerness, just as I have an indicator of who I am with my disability. The top surgery scars represent me reclaiming my queerness and who I am essentially overall. So that long tangent was my tattoos.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and so you talked a lot about your tattoos and your art, which actually it's interesting that that's your coping mechanism to like deal with your depression, because you use such like bold colors and they always just like cheer me up too. So do you have any other?
I'm sorry, I'm like lagging because of the live captions, but thank you. I want to say thank you to that.
Okay, yeah, of course. And do you have any other like interesting art projects coming up?
I do, yeah. I mean, right now I'm constantly painting. I think it helps me in isolation. So I want to do more big projects, whether that is big paintings. You know, I would love to do a mural in New York, which I actually was going to do, but now because of the quarantine, I think it's postponed. So that's something that I would essentially love to do in the future, is just go like big and like be on one of those pulley systems. I don't know what they're called, but you know, be able
Yeah.
to um that'd be so amazing. And yeah, I mean, I do have a lot of ideas coming up, but stay tuned.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because I was also like really excited when you had teamed up with, I think it was Inkbox, right? Because I saw the announcement, and like I was already familiar with them, and I was like I couldn't find something exactly I wanted, and then I was just like, ooh, like this is
Yeah.
great. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. That was actually super exciting because I feel like a lot of my followers are younger and they cannot legally get tattoos. So I
Yeah.
think,
So I like where this conversation is headed, but also I want to talk about like also you act.
yeah,
Yeah. So could you talk about your advocacy there and like having encouraging people to actually cast disabled people for disabled roles and like what that experience has been for you?
yes. So that kind of happened out of the blue. I have a really good friend who is actually been a huge light with finding my identity in the deaf community. Her name is Ridloff. She's a deaf actress and actually working on a Marvel movie now. Anyway, she sent me a casting call by the Warner Brothers, and they said, we are looking for a half Latinx or half Asian actor who is deaf or hard of hearing. And she sent it to me, and I was like, oh, I have no acting experience or had no acting experience. And I was like, I can't say no to this. Like, it's very niche. I should go in and just give it my best. So I did. And the rest is history. And I was on this show called Titans, playing this character whose name was Jericho. And he is mute, but uses ASL, sign language. So that was really incredible to be able to depict that because, as you said yourself, a lot of times disabled individuals are not cast for disabled roles, which is a huge problem because we already have, any marginalized individual already has trouble getting into a role. And to be able to give a marginalized role to someone who is not marginalized just takes that opportunity right out of our hands. And if anything, if disabled people are not playing disabled roles, then able-bodied people should not play disabled roles. It's just until the moment comes where disabled people are playing able-bodied roles as much as able-bodied people are playing disabled roles, then okay. But until that time comes, all disabled roles should be given to disabled individuals.
Yeah, it also just like it just lacks the authenticity of like the experience and like I don't know. I yeah, I definitely agree with you there. But I'm looking at the time and I definitely want to just ask you one last question before we open it up completely to the audience. So we talked about a lot, but if there was any message you could share with the many communities watching tonight in support of Pride, what might that be?
I think what I was saying before, that everything is on a continuum, regarding your identities, that's something that I wish that I knew growing up, and that helped me so much realize that I didn't need to search for a place that was perfect for me. Rather, I could create that place myself. And that just ties into self-empowerment and being able to be your own representation. I would just want to remind anyone out there that they don't have to wait for a specific niche community or place to open up to them. They can just look in the mirror and feel that is enough and understand that all they are feeling and all of their experiences are valid and everything is on a continuum.
Perfect. Marco, the floor is yours, or the screen, whatever.
Thank you. We have several people from around the world that are tuning in. A few people saying hi from both Brazil as well as Milan in Italy. We have several people asking about, with being involved with the fashion and acting industries, how do you think we can better create spaces and support people of different gender, sexual features, body differences, and just break into these diverse fields and make it like more acceptable and more accessible?
I think that casting is the main key to this, making sure that you're casting a truly diverse group of individuals and not just showcasing their identities through words, actually giving them the platform and allowing them to tell their own story on your platform is key, because we are not just our labels. We are also entirely dynamic human beings who have a whole story behind us, and hearing those stories helps normalize and humanize us as people and as a community. So being able to cast people all different types, especially people of color and or disabled, and giving them complete control over what they want to say with that platform could really catalyze the progress.
Right. We have a completely different question from Sabrina. Do you think VR could be potentially used to like build empathy for privileged people to understand marginalized identities?
Absolutely. I think that was actually something that I was trying to do with my VR. I became weary of repeating myself so much about my stories and all of the traumas that I had faced. And I thought, what if someone were able to put on a headset and literally be able to experience a snippet of what I face? Whether I was actually trying to build this as one of my thesis projects. Going to burrito bars is surprisingly scary for me. When I was a kid, I used to be terrified of going to burrito bars simply because of those short interactions you would have with strangers, where I wasn't necessarily sure if I should tell them I was deaf right off the bat. I just didn't know how to advocate for myself, or if I should just try to go through the whole thing and figure out what they were saying. But a lot of times they were mumbling. And I think if I were to take that whole experience and program it and put it into a headset and show them how this simple experience, like going to a burrito bar, was so complex and nerve-wracking for me at the time, simply because I didn't know how to properly advocate for myself with my disability, it could make them more aware of a wide range of other things, and just hopefully make them stop and think throughout other little moments throughout their day. So I think absolutely. And there are actually a lot of people already working on creating more empathetic stimulations out there with VR and AR.
That's super exciting.
Yeah, it is.
A lot of people are asking about advice when it comes to dysphoria, especially with this quarantine happening.
I think with dysphoria, similar to like your own personal happiness and fulfillment, it's something that's so personalized. I really can't tell you exactly what would help you yourself. But similar to making a list, making a chart, the way that I managed my dysphoria was writing. I wrote so much. I think really zoning in on those specific triggers that you have with your dysphoria and understanding little things that you can do to make them better, if that, regardless, whatever that is, understanding that more, you can make little shifts that relieve you of your dysphoria. Also, just talking about it. You know, there's so many resources out there right now for queer individuals who are experiencing dysphoria that it's just really nice to talk to someone about it that really understands. And also just doing that it'll be a catharsis.
No, I totally get that. As also a transmasc biracial person, I definitely, being able to talk to people as much as possible really helps with dysphoria for me as well.
Absolutely. Would you want to add anything to that? How you
I think for myself, just like understanding where I am in the moment and having a lot of mindfulness kind of helps. And even if like you don't have anything happening that day, you don't have a Zoom call or anything, just like dressing the way that makes you feel comfortable and makes you feel very authentic, I think can really brighten up the mood in a situation and can help out a lot as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. A lot of people are saying that they love you in Titans and your Jericho.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Do you have any fun projects coming up regarding like your art, your acting, or activism?
Yes, I do have a couple. I am working right now on some art that's inspired by Keith Haring. There are a few I can't talk about. Like I said, hopefully a mural in New York City will pop up soon, which would be amazing to do, which I actually wanted to share the location I'd be doing it so I could have people come and like actually see it live.
Right.
But yeah, for now, just like a bunch of things brewing, and don't go anywhere. Stay tuned.
Like jumping off of that, are you thinking about doing more like live streams and trying to like do stuff art wise when it comes to your platform?
Yes, I mean, that's something that has been a challenge for me to navigate live streams just because most of the time they're not accessible to me. This is the only live stream I know that has had both captioning and ASL provided, but I would love to see more platforms use both live captioning and ASL just because not all deaf or hard of hearing people are fluent in sign. So live captioning can be extremely helpful. So once I figure out how to have both of those options provided, I'll be doing a lot more live streaming because I would really like to use this time to get to connect to people, but I don't want to do that if some people will be left out.
Right. Jumping on a similar tangent, what are some advice that you would have for people that want to become an interpreter for ASL?
First of all, that's cool. And thank you for thinking about that as a career choice. Second of all, I think being aware of your space as an interpreter is extremely important. As a child, when I had an interpreter in 4th grade and 5th and 6th, a lot of times I felt like my interpreter wouldn't listen to what I specifically wanted. Maybe it was because I wasn't expressing myself clearly. At that time, I was very young and probably had tantrums. But I think checking in with the person you're interpreting for and asking them what they're comfortable with is key, because it's always important to recognize that you are the interpreter and you are just there to interpret, and to remember to not overstep those boundaries when it comes to interpreting for a deaf or hard of hearing individual.
Awesome. Given your intersectionality and your identities, how have you dealt with people like that gatekeep, or making you feel like you're not enough of this or that identity, whether it be POC or queer communities?
There are always people out there that will validate you and see you for who you are. And finding those people is the key, whether that is online or offline. For me, when I was in high school, clearly I didn't have representation of people that would accept me for me around me. So, social media was this incredible place where I was able to find all these people that validated me instantly and truly saw me for me. And I think this also goes back to recognizing that identities are on a continuum, and you yourself, as long as you know you don't have to fit into one of those boxes, you can feel that empowerment from yourself. And that's what's most important. Conditioning yourself to realize that you can empower yourself without any outer interaction is truly, I think, one of the only superpowers we can have as human beings.
Definitely. And I feel that a lot, especially, like I mentioned, being biracial and queer.
Yeah.
So it's like definitely that hard balance of finding the people that will really support you in that aspect.
Absolutely. Do you feel like you found most of those people in person or online?
I have a good combination of both, I feel. Especially once I got to college, I was able to really meet people that were in very similar circles. So that really helped out a lot.
That's really
I also went to high school around central Pennsylvania, and going to Penn State, I was like, wow, this is a lot different. This is nice.
I'm glad you're having a good experience now that you're in college.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have a few more questions, if we have the time allowed. Do you have any book or movie recommendations for quarantine to keep people occupied?
Yes, I am reading right now. This is a very dense book, but it's called Crip Theory, and it's about the intersections of disability and queerness. And this is just something I feel like I have not read anyone like has. I wait. How do I say that? I have not seen anyone write about. So this has been it's very interesting. So that's a great book that I recommend. I also read this book called The Postmortals, and it's about if there was a cure for like mortality, basically, and it analyzes how all the structures of oppression are a bit shifted after that cure in a realistic way. So essentially, it's a Black Mirror episode in a book, which was interesting. I think that people could read it really fast. Movies, I got this great movie recommendation from one of my friends, Alok. It's called Short Bus. It's probably rated R. So I would just throw that out there. But it's a very interesting movie about the queer and art spaces in New York City. And then Honey Boy, which is a book kind of about Shia LaBeouf's upbringing that he fictionalized a bit, but also wrote. And it's really beautiful. So that as well.
We also have one more question. Do you have any advice for staying involved in the deaf and hard of hearing communities, especially in New York?
Yes. The husband of the incredible woman that I mentioned earlier, Lauren Ridloff, her husband Douglas runs ASL Slam, which is basically like verbal poetry slam, but in ASL. It's incredible. It's moving. It's beautiful. It's unlike anything that I ever seen before. I think it's its own art form. Definitely check that out. I think that it's only $10 on Friday nights typically. I guess not now, but when all of this continues, ASL Slam. I think I've heard that the Meetup app has different ASL practice groups, which meet up for free, different levels to just sign together. I've also heard that there's a deaf theater in New York, which I have to look into more, but I'm sure if you Google it, it would come up. Yeah.
All right, we've talked about so much. Thank you, Marco, for those questions from the audience, and thank you just for being a part of this. And thank you, Chella, for like being here. That was you gave like such wonderful responses, and I'm also just really looking forward to not only watching all those recommendations and like reading and all that stuff, but I'm just looking forward to like the future and seeing more like minority, like people who are like Black and queer and disabled, or like Indigenous and queer, like just being represented in media and books, and not like just having our stories centered on like those aspects of our identity, but just like being in sci-fi or like action or like things like that. So thank you for being here. This has been a wonderful evening. And like, thanks for all of our viewers for tuning in spite of everything that's going on, and like kind of being flexible with us. Thank you, Gary, for helping make this more accessible. Thank you for all of our sponsors. Did you all have any like final remarks?
I feel like you summed it up
Yeah.
beautifully. I don't want to add anything, but I just want to thank you and Marco so much for having me virtually, and being patient with me as I navigate this.
Yeah, I'm so glad I got to do this, because you have like such a like loving and like warm energy about you, and I just, again, I've loved following you, and like I'm just really excited to be a part of this.
Thank you so much. That's so sweet.
Yeah, the same comes from me. The same comes from me. Thank you again from Penn State, as well as the Center for Sexual and Gender Diversity. We are so excited that this still got to happen through all this. And we want to thank everyone who tuned in to watch and sent in your questions. Sorry if we didn't get to yours during this time, but there's still stuff in the future. So thank you again. And thank you, Chella, for coming.
Absolutely. It didn't involve much, just that involved opening my laptop. Okay, yeah.
Awesome.